Nostalgia. That thing we feel when we remember when The Simpsons were funny, or when the internet looked like this. A lovely feeling that it used to be a cerebral disease suffered only by the Swiss.
Amazing facts.
Nostalgia, nostalgia, nostalgia. A very common word nowadays that has a fascinating origin from an unlikely source. The Swiss, and of all, Swiss mercenaries. It's the late 17th century and Europe is a clusterfuck of wars, alliances, kings and empires in need of good soldiers. Enter the scene the Swiss mercenaries, an elite force of professional soldiers that for centuries played an important role in Europe's tug of war, being hired by the Spanish, the French, the British and the Dutch for several conflicts. These soldiers were pretty busy men, traveling all over Europe for many years. No wonder many of them started having feelings about the country, missing the green pastures of the Alps, wishing to hear again the sounds of their youth. Some couldn't bear it. They would start losing their appetite, their strength, develop fever and in some cases even die. Johannes Hoffa, a freshly graduated Swiss physician, collected observations of Swiss soldiers and servants abroad. With barely 19 years, he published his discoveries in Medical Discoveries on Nostalgia in 1688. Just a reminder, this is the 17th century, where medicine knowledge was pretty basic and a lot of times just completely wrong. This is one of those times. According to Hoffa, there was enough evidence to call this phenomenon a disease. A disease that had plagued the Swiss mercenaries for a long time, under the name Heimweh or La Maladie du Pays, names that could be translated as homesickness. But Hoffa wanted to give it a proper medical name and he proposed nostalgia, from the Greek nosos, return to the native land, and algos, suffering and grief. He wrote, "It is possible from the force of the sound nostalgia to define the sad mood originating from the desire for the return to one's native land." Hoffa also proposed the term philopatridомania, but yeah, that one didn't stick. How the young physician describes this disease is interesting. From the living spirits entirely by its own momentum along uncommon routes, through the untouched courses of the channels of the brain to the body, and by revisiting the oval tubes of the center brain, it is originated by arousing especially the uncommon and ever-present idea of the recalled native land in the mind. Okay, let's translate that. These spirits are a primitive version of what we know now as the nervous system. So Hoffa basically says that something, an external object, triggers the circulation of these spirits in the body, which get to the brain and produce a persistent call to the homeland. Sadness, fever, disturbed sleep, heart palpitations, stupidity of the mind, continuously decrease of strength, and finally death follows. He lists a few cases of Swiss, men and women, all of them young and mostly living abroad, who suffered these symptoms. In all cases they recover by being sent to their home nation. This is, according to Hoffa, the only remedy. He notes that the disease is particularly endemic of the Swiss nation, possibly because of the migration of their youth in search for money and liberty in the foreign lands. Some colleagues of him even point at the Republic of Bern, specifically. Hoffa nonetheless mentions that other European tribes could also be affected. According to Hoffa, the object that triggers nostalgia could be among hundreds. For example, different weather, foreign manners, and diverse kinds of food. In a subsequent edition of this thesis, a song was added, a dangerous melody that produced a pathological air that triggered nostalgia in all those who heard it. The song, titled Kuereien, a close translation would be Call of the Cows, was a typical melody sung in the fields to call the cows to the stable. For an early detection, Hoffa mentions some signs to be aware of. If they frequently wander about sad, if they scorn foreign manners, if they are seized by a distaste of strange conversations, if they incline by nature to melancholy, if they frequently make a show of the delights of the fatherland and prefer them to all foreign. The discovery by Hoffa was not only accepted but also expanded during the 18th century. Another Swiss physician suggested that nostalgia was actually caused by a sharp differential in atmospheric pressure, which seems reasonable since the Swiss mercenaries would be often deployed in lowlands. A military physician even blamed cowbells, arguing that their incessant clanging in the Alps caused neurological damage on the eardrums and brain cells. So how does disease end up in our day-to-day vocabulary, referring to the past rather than the homeland? By the end of the 19th century, nostalgia became a psychiatric condition rather than a physical one. It was regarded as a form of depression, and the symptoms were the same described by Hofer, with only death being left out. This time, 4 groups were mostly affected: soldiers, seamen, immigrants, and first-year boarding or university students. So homesickness and nostalgia were still one and the same. It was only in the second part of the last century when both concepts diverged. Nostalgia became more of a lay term to describe the yearning of warm, old times, childhood, while homesickness remained in the psychiatric field. It wasn't only a change of meaning, but also a change of perception. This new nostalgia, a yearning for aspects of one's past, which could include the homeland but not necessarily, and that wasn't limited to a profession or an age group, wasn't a negative or a bad emotion, but a positive one, filled with happy personal associations.